I've got to start with this bombshell expose of Britain's asylum system. You interviewed someone whose pseudonym you've given, Nikki, who works in the asylum system.
One of the first things she said to me was, I keep thinking that one day I'm going to turn on the TV and it's inevitable that I will see a man I've granted asylum to who was raped or murdered, a girl like one of my girls. Nikki has 3 daughters. Perhaps the most shocking thing was that
we have asylum seekers murdering innocent British people.
Nikki thinks there are hundreds of thousands. The official numbers we're given are just the tip of the iceberg. He was wandering around Epping asking schoolgirls to make babies with him. Nikki said they got a memo saying the police and terrorist checks would be suspended. There are sex offenders on the loose who've been granted asylum.
You were visited by the police 1 year ago for a social media post from 2 years ago.
There was a knock on the door and it was 2 police officers who said that I had caused offence to someone. He said her crimes, it's me, can carry a prison sentence of up to 7 years.
Are you saying that this is the death of Britain? Allison Pearson, thank you so much for coming to speak with me. I've been keen to have you on the show for a long time because I'm a great fan of your column at the Telegraph. I think you're one of our country's best writers. You're a beautiful writer, but also you cover all the most important topics that so much more else of the media are just too terrified to talk about. Honestly, a lot of people in the country will know about your arrest for a social media post, which I'm going to ask you about. And I also want to ask you about your recent article about the BBC implosion and what Trump's threat of suing them might look like. But I've got to start with this absolute bombshell expose of Britain's asylum system. You interviewed someone whose pseudonym you've given, Nikki, who works in the asylum system, and she explained to you what sort of hellish situation it is. And I wondered if you might spell it out for listeners and viewers who haven't heard this story, haven't got into it.
Yeah, so Nikki, as I call her, is an asylum caseworker. There are about 6,500 of those distributed over 19 centres around the UK. And I think, Winston, I think we all sense it's probably quite chaotic because we know that this year alone, 39,000 mainly young, undocumented males have come across the channel in small boats. So I went to meet Nikki expecting to hear that things were not great, but she said, you're going to be very shocked. And I was very, very shocked. Absolutely shattered, to be honest. And one of the first things she said to me was, I keep thinking that one day I'm going to turn on the TV news and it's inevitable that I will see a man I've granted asylum to who was raped or murdered, a girl like one of my girls. Nikki has 3 daughters. So that's her motive in wanting to speak out about what's happening. So what are the most shocking things?
Well, if I might, this is a real thing that's already happening. The famous example is Rhiannon White, I should say,
Correct.
from Warsaw, stabbed
Yes.
23 times.
Yes.
And killed. She was working in an asylum hotel.
Yes.
That's just one example. There's also the Ethiopian at the
Yes.
Epping
Yes.
hotel. So this isn't hypothetical. This is literally happening. We have asylum seekers murdering innocent British people, even those who are attempting to help those people. But Nikki, of course, is in the system and seeing how we've got to a situation where such killers are even in our country.
Yes, so I guess perhaps the most shocking thing was that she has to grant asylum to men who they know have been exposing themselves in children's play areas.
In Britain.
Men who have been stalking girls, men who are on the sex offenders register, men who could be up on a rape charge and they would still be considered for asylum. And the reason for that is that the law as it stands at the moment is that unless someone seeking asylum has been sentenced to 12 months in jail, they're still considered for asylum. And what Nikki was explaining is that they, when you have an applicant, she said they've got to call them customers now, which gives you a bit of a clue as to the attitude. So the customers, who are these young undocumented males who've destroyed their papers and broken into our country, she will do a police check and an international terrorist check. And the police check will come up and it will say Mr. X exposed himself in a playground. But because, say, that guy is from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Sudan, or Kuwait, those are 4 countries where effectively they're not allowed to deny asylum to anyone from there.
As decided by the British government, or is that the ECHR?
As decided by the Home Office, and that's because those are not deemed to be safe countries to return anyone to. So in the case of Eritrea, I'm probably sounding quite mild-mannered here. This absolutely infuriates me. So in the case of Eritrea, they have forced military conscription. So anyone who says they're from Eritrea, we can't return them to Eritrea because they'll be conscripted into the army. Now, I would argue that not many people in Britain could care less whether anyone Eritrean is going to be sent into the Eritrean army, because we probably care a bit more about the welfare of our own women and children. But that's how it is. And until recently, there were other countries that are called high grant countries, and they included Syria, Libya, various other Middle Eastern or North African countries. Now, the Home Office, when my Telegraph piece was published, we put it to them, and they denied that there was such a thing as automatic asylum to people from certain countries. We know that isn't true. And we also know that if you're claimed to be a Syrian, but from 2021 to 2023, 99% of Syrians claiming asylum have been granted asylum. So that's effectively, if you say you're from a particular country. And obviously, as Nikki pointed out, most African males are now saying they're Eritrean.
Sick of the lies and deception from the mainstream media? Regain control of your news with Ground News. Let's take a quick look at how the media is reporting on Trump's order to resume nuclear weapons testing. Left-leaning, Democracy Now! Around the headline, extraordinarily destabilizing decision, Trump denounced over call to immediately resume nuclear tests, while right-leaning Press TV led with, I had no choice. Trump orders U.S. War Department to immediately resume nuclear weapons testing. 2 very different narratives on the same story. We specifically partnered with Ground News because their app and website helped me and my team cut through media bias and see the full picture. There are over 645 articles published on Trump's decision, and we can access every single one through Ground News, complete with source context, lean ratings, and key breakdowns. Seeing all sides, regardless of political lean, is essential to cutting through bias and actually being informed. That's why Ground News' blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either side, is such a powerful tool. I genuinely believe in what Ground News is doing, and I encourage you to check it out by scanning the QR code or visiting ground.news/Winston. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors, you are also supporting this show. So, given that Assad has been toppled in Syria, we might have expected some of that 99% of Syrian applicants to perhaps go home. I don't imagine we've got any data of them actually leaving.
I think
yet to be seen.
I think it's working as well as the one in, one out French deal, which
is more of a one out, one in,
which is 1 out, 3 in, or whatever. But yes, so so what Nikki would be and her colleagues would be able to do they would be able to ask nationality questions. So, what is the flag of Eritrea? What is the capital of Eritrea? Who is the Prime Minister of Eritrea? But of course, Winston, we know, don't we? There's a thing called Google.
Oh, wait. So they will say they're from Eritrea, knowing that if they do so, they'll get automatic asylum.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So then they get quizzed on them.
They will get quizzed, but it's very easy to gen up on certain nationalities. So that's the main sort of headline. If it's an Afghan male who, in fact, Nikki mentioned that when the Allies left Afghanistan, there had been people that they had, the asylum system had been able to, Afghanis they've been able to reject, and then they got a memo saying you're going to have to reassess all those claims now because the Taliban have taken over, so it's now too dangerous to return all the people you've said no to. And she said there was one particular guy who had been extremely sexually violent, who had raped, who had done numerous terrible things, and she said, no way am I going to grant the right to stay to this guy because he's a wrong 'un, and I think he poses a threat to women and children, and he's a criminal. And they said to her, you're not allowed to turn him down because the basis of the claim is that he will be in danger going back to Afghanistan. Now, all someone from Afghanistan or Iran or Iraq has to do is post one thing on social media against the regime in their country, and then they can say it's not safe for me to go back because I would be a political prisoner. Or they can get off the boat. I hear they get off the boats, they come to London, they stand outside the Iranian embassy with a poster saying "Down with Iran," and that's them in. So,
and even write about them pretending to be Christian when certain these things don't.
So there are a number of asylum claims, and Nikki says that you see from certain countries. So men from Bangladesh will say they're homosexual. And it's not safe for them to be sent back to their country. And then someone else from Iraq or Iran will say, I'm a Christian convert, so it's not safe for me to go back to my country because of that. And that will be their first asylum claim. People like Nikki may turn them down. That could take a year or two, and then they'll come back again, and then they'll say, oh, actually, I am gay. I said I was a Christian convert. And she'll say, do you know what Easter is? No. So she says, okay, you're not a Christian convert. And then it's a complete sort of farcical carousel of claims. So the next claim will be, it won't be safe for me because I'm a political fugitive. And I kind of understood that there were these asylum claims, but then there's also this thing called further submissions. So once they've exhausted all the previous excuses or reasons to stay, they can then come up with something else. So by this stage, Mr. Ahmed has been in the country for 7 years and he may have fathered a child, Winston. So then he can say, well, it would breach my right to a family life if you deported me now because I've got a child. So essentially, it's as Nikki said, it would be a joke if it wasn't so dangerous.
So when you say the term automatic asylum, presumably that's not an official term. Do you mean that it's de facto automatic asylum? So when it's any of these nations that you outline, when it comes to them, they're staying. They aren't going anywhere. Is that have I understood that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And so is there, since the Rwanda deal kind of disappeared or was shut down, is there any other way for us? Is there any way that Britain is removing these people? For example, in the French deal to return them back to France, and just trying to get a sense of how hard and fast this automatic asylum thing is. That they're here and they're staying, and that's it. Is it as simple as you're saying?
It certainly seems to be. Yeah, it certainly seems to be that certain nationalities are pretty much guaranteed being given asylum. Now, you have to remember that Nikki thinks there are hundreds of thousands of them here, okay? That the official numbers we're given are just the tip of the iceberg. So the ones that they're working on at the moment, this isn't the almost 40,000 who've come over this year, or even the, whatever it was, almost 40,000 more last year. It'll probably be working on the year before that. So in the meantime, lots of them are being kept in the asylum hotels.
Sorry, can I just pick up on that hundreds of thousands? So in the piece, you talk about the sort of hundreds of thousands who are lost, where where I think you used the term implicit withdrawal.
Yes.
Or Nikki used the term implicit withdrawal, where essentially the system will give up and stop trying to deal with them and just let them be in the country.
Well, they will imply it's all sorted. They'll say, oh, that guy's off the books. In fact, he's absconded or he's in the community.
Okay.
So it looks like case closed, but in fact, we couldn't find him.
Okay. And that's different, though, from, let's say, someone who's a sex offender but didn't get sentenced 12 months, as you described, officially being allowed and granted asylum. That's a different phenomenon, right?
Yes.
Do we have a sense of those numbers?
She didn't mention those numbers. We do know that next week, in fact, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, I think, is going to address some of the loopholes, and one of which will be the sex offenders who have been able to grant asylum. One of the most extraordinary things when my piece was published and we put the various claims to the Home Office was they didn't deny that sex offenders and men who'd been guilty of gross and indecent behaviour, they didn't say that doesn't happen because they know it does happen. So I guess one of many strong feelings I have is absolute incredulity that the system is designed to protect foreign males who've broken into our country, and to hell with the safety of women and children. You've cited Rhiannon White. We have had in Epping where Hadush Kabatu got off a boat and 8 days later, with new clothes given to him by Britain, with a nice hotel to stay in given to him by Britain, with £50 pocket money given to him by Britain, he was wandering around Epping asking schoolgirls to make babies with him. Okay, so, and I would argue that...
Did he literally say that?
He did. Yes, he did.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, he did. And it's not just a bug, right? This is, if you import men from countries which have deeply misogynist or, as we would see them, unpleasant attitudes to women, which we can see in Afghanistan where women aren't allowed to speak outside anymore. If you get a guy from that country and he comes ashore on the Kent coast, he doesn't become Hugh Grant when he gets out of the boat, does he? He still imports those values. And I would say women and children in our country are in extreme peril from this invasion. Do you remember Suella Braverman, when she was Home Secretary, used the word invasion, and all of the usual suspects said, well, we don't approve of her choice of language. And you thought that's what we're up against. So let's allow our women and children to be raped and stalked, as long as no one uses the inappropriate language. And other things Nikki told me, the numbers are so huge that they have these periodic bursts of, let's try and get the backlog down. So Rishi Sunak did that. There was a period when Rishi Sunak was the Prime Minister when he said, we're going to get this 100,000 historic backlog down.
He ran on that, right? That was part of his
he ran on
campaign
that,
pledge.
Yes. And Nikki said they got a memo saying that the police and terrorist checks would be suspended. You would not have to check whether this applicant had a police or terrorist record.
So let's dig into this, because I was going to ask you about the history of how Britain has come to this disastrous situation where we've basically got open borders and any old nutters are coming in, and sex offenders. And you go back to Rishi Sunak, just as you've done there, but you should do this in your piece. And he made this pledge to clear up the legacy asylum backlog. And so as you put it there, that seems just you're implying, I think, or maybe you're saying explicitly, that his way of dealing with that was just to let everyone in. There wasn't a deal of proper vetting. What happened exactly when Sunak came to implementing this pledge of his?
I don't think we can blame him. I think that he will have made the promise, we're going to clear the 100,000 backlog, and whoever the senior people in the Home Office will have thought, right, we've got to try and implement that. And one of the cutting corners ways that they thought about was, let's suspend these checks, because in those days, I think it's more automatic now. They had to wait a week. You'd send off to the two checks, the police check and the terrorist check. So I suspect, if you were to say to him, do you know, Rishi Sunak, that because of your promise, they suspended the terrorism and police checks, he could well be shocked and appalled. He could well be. But the situation, Winston, I would say, is that the system, the Home Office, it acts to protect itself. So the main thing is to hide the depth of the crisis from everybody. So the figures that are given out regularly, something like this. Another instance, Nikki said at the moment, is that they were having to do 5 asylums a week and do 5 interviews. Now that's just gone up to 6, but there are targets, right? So these staff, often just recruited from job centres, not the experienced people of old. So they've got a lot of new people who are out of their depth. She says they're flailing around. So they have to hit targets. And if they don't achieve their targets, there will be a disciplinary procedure. So the incentive clearly is, grant, right? Tick, tick, tick. And Nikki says the pressure is get the numbers out, get the numbers out, get the numbers out. So
they're being incentivized not to get through the backlog and approve or disapprove. They're incentivized to approve backlog.
Yes, because approving just takes half a day. So it's a much easier process than thorough checking and turning down. So human beings are human beings. You want your salary, you need to pay your mortgage, you need to pay your bills. So the rate of approvals is going up, and an independent check by a senior person found that there was a big uptick on Fridays of approvals of asylum claim, and that's all the staff trying to keep their jobs.
Trying to keep their job?
Well, because they will then hit their targets.
Oh, by the end of the week.
So get to Friday, you haven't met enough grants, so you'll do a flurry of grants on the Friday to keep your job.
So I wanted to explore the history of this. And on this show, we've done a lot about immigration, both legal and illegal. It really starts after the Second World War, and famously with Windrush, but also that late 40s, early 50s, we have South Asian immigration, but a lot of this is actually legal. And if you fast forward to New Labour, it starts to get turbocharged. And under Boris Johnson, of course, the Boris wave, it's uber turbocharged.
And Theresa May.
And Theresa May.
Because Theresa May brought in this, the things she looked on as her legacy was Modern Slavery Act. Now, there was good aspects to that. A lot of this, I expect, is... Can
you explain the Modern Slavery Act to me? Sorry.
Well, no, just one of the things people can say is they can come to Nikki or one of her colleagues and say, I'm a victim of modern slavery. Now, she does see genuine women who've been trafficked. And let's be clear, Winston, our country has got a proud tradition of granting asylum and refuge to people. She sees women, they've suffered female genital mutilation. They're terrified to go back to their country where they will then be forced to become cutters themselves. So people like Nikki are really trying to be fair to those people. But the modern slavery has become just another racket, really. So that was a Theresa May invention, which was supposed to pick up trafficked people, but it's now just added to the list. It's been abused.
And it's used as a tool.
Yeah.
Right,
yes.
To get around.
Yes.
So, as you say, we have got a proud history of offering exile to dissidents from around the world. Of course, in the Second World War, welcoming Jews,
kinder transport.
Yes. Exactly. So, it seems to me that a lot of not just illegal immigration and asylum, but legal immigration is framed around the Second World War, and it's almost the founding myth of this post-war establishment view that if you don't let people come, they're going to be killed. They're going to look what happened in Nazi Germany, and so that seems to be the kind of maybe the noble myth at the foundation of this. Do you think I've understood that correctly? And I try to sort of understand the core of how we've got to this system where we're doing insane things.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And I think a lot of the reason that people like Nikki, their hands are tied, is things like the European Convention on Human Rights, the Human Rights Act.
European Convention of Human Rights, this has been used in various cases, right? For example, when they have a child with a British person, they can now stay in the country.
Yes, and we've heard of the more absurd examples, like a man saying his child didn't like Albanian chicken nuggets, so that he couldn't possibly be deported. But yes, Nikki would say that they'd be come up against the fact that they'd say, Article 2 and Article 3 will, prevent, would see this person as being at risk. But the reality is that the bar is now set so low that anybody from Eritrea or Somalia or Sudan would be at risk. So the logical conclusion is anyone who manages to get here from some of these countries, we couldn't send them back. But ultimately, that's clearly a suicidal policy for our country, isn't it? So I think that phrase, suicidal empathy, whereby we now see the point of view of everyone except our own people, that spells tragedy for our country. It's since I've written about it, I've been hearing from across the country, areas like Cornwall, Dorset, previously very peaceful rural areas, where Bournemouth, which was a sort of, fading old dowager of respectability, hundreds and hundreds of illegal migrants in Bournemouth now, making it scary for people to walk outside. It feels like
people are leaving London now. I've got family, younger female cousins who are leaving the city. They don't feel safe here anymore.
No, well, even in Cornwall, where they'll say this is a county of sanctuary, and suddenly you've got 500 guys from the Middle East or from Africa, and this actually Nikki said, "I'm not a racist, Alison. I'm a realist." And I think we have to be realistic. I've written this before, Winston. I think people think it's a bit rude to mention it. If you've got 600 young males just come ashore, come across the channel, and they're going to put them in Crowthorne in East Sussex, right? This is a town of 20,000 people, a very picturesque small town on the edge of the Ashdown Forest, sort of Winnie the Pooh forest. They want sex, don't they, Winston? Why does nobody in the Home Office think is it rude to mention that you've got mainly guys in their 20s and 30s? Put them in a hotel or a camp. What does anyone think they're going to do? And I don't specifically blame them, because that's what's going to happen. Plus, and then to that, you add the fact that they are unfamiliar with the fact that girls in our country walk, in school uniform, they walk around in skirts, they walk around in, T-shirts or bra tops or something like that. So what does anyone think is going to happen? So while they're obeying all the international human rights rulings, they are absolutely not thinking about human nature or the threat to children, which seems to me to be reaching a national emergency now.
Can you explain to me why they've ended up scattered in all of these rural parts of the country? And is there the intentional plan or machinations of...
Well, you may remember that Angela Rayner, when she was the Deputy Prime Minister, she actually used the word scattered. So I think there is a plan, and the plan was to scatter them in communities. What we know is that originally, I think they were being put in some of the poorer parts of the country, so some of the sort of eastern coastal towns and so on. There's a very interesting statistic that after the Southport riots, which arose from the massacre of little girls at a Taylor Swift dance class, the rioting was worst in towns and areas which had taken the most Afghan migrants. So this is really adding now to community tensions around the country.
Yeah.
I think, if you want my honest opinion, I think they are trying to hide the scale of the problem. And something we found out recently, the Telegraph, that the Keir Starmer and the government have pledged to empty the asylum hotels by the end of this Parliament 2029, because they know it's so toxic for their electoral prospects. Now, most people hearing that, your viewers would think, oh, good, they're going to deport them. We're going to empty the hotels. It's not going to cost us £6 million a day anymore. They're all going to be gone. No, they're going to let them out into the community. And now there's a very quiet, sly new tactic. They're saying to the guys in the asylum hotels, if you find a friend to live with in the community, we'll give you an extra £100 a week, right? So empty the hotels, put them out in the community. The system is working to hide its own failings. That's its main aim. Its main aim is not the safety of the British people. I can't emphasize that enough. Yeah. This is about deceit. It's an absolute crisis. They must have meetings where they know the stuff I'm telling you, right? They must know there are sex offenders on the loose who've been granted asylum. They must know that. So how are they dealing with that? They're dealing with that by not broadcasting it, by hiding the numbers and telling people like Nikki, shovel them through, grant them asylum, and then it doesn't look like there's a problem.
Would the man who was killed in Uxbridge last month, his killer was an asylum. It was an asylum case. And he was an Afghan, and had he been kicked out of one of these migrant hotels? I think he was staying in one of these multi-home.
I think he was staying in a house that had been given to an Afghan family, and he was subletting a room, which is illegal, by the way. And I believe, I'm not 100% sure, that he had been granted asylum.
Right. So it's also worth noting as we go through all of this, these people are not actually fleeing Eritrea, they're fleeing northern France. Yes. And so it's a kind of double insult to this horrific injury. And there's many facets to this story, but I want to pick up on you saying that this is suicide. Obviously, that's drastic language, and you've very clearly made the case of how we're doing tremendous damage, unforgivable damage to our country. But suicide, sort of, are you saying that this is the death of Britain?
Well, it's a form of cultural suicide, and we can see that the country, until I guess the last 20, 25 years, was really pretty good at absorbing waves of immigration, going back to the Huguenots. You mentioned the wartime generation. You mentioned the Windrush generation. When the numbers were relatively modest, people could be settled in. If you walk around London or some of our main cities now, we see all sort of mixed race babies and children. We can see that it's worked, and the UK comes either top or second of the most tolerant countries in the world quite regularly.
Oh, we're tolerating sex offenders. So
well
not what you meant.
Well, but that was before, right? Yeah. So I think now that there are obviously growing tensions. What I meant by suicide was a Trojan horse. Why would you allow? Obviously not all the people across the Channel are going to be rapists and terrorists. A proportion of them are, right? So we don't need them in our country. We don't need to run that risk. That risk should be foremost in the minds of the state. The government exists to protect the public, right? But it's absolutely warped to prioritize the fact that these men will be in danger, possibly, if they're returned to their country of origin. That's not our problem. Our problem is a 14-year-old girl in Epping walking to school, coming face to face with this Ethiopian guy who says he wants to make babies with her, and then the lady walking past who comes to intervene, then she's assaulted as well. Why should that woman and girl be exposed to that risk? Why? Where are their human rights?
Yeah.
They haven't got they can't go and shout and cite Article 2 and 3. It's just a racket, Winston. There's a whole immigration law firms that are built on our constant vexatious claims to keep these guys in the country, right? They should be shut down. It's just, well, you could probably tell. Who is speaking up for the women and girls? The pink ladies in Epping.
That was wonderful to see those ladies standing up. And when you see the women taking the streets, then you know that the country's at a turning point.
Mums and aunts and sisters and nanas. I've met some of them. You don't want to mess with them, I tell you. And these some of them quite cockney ladies who the kind of women who would have been driving ambulances in the Blitz, then they're not taking any nonsense, and they can see what's being done, but then they're branded racists, far right, Nazis. Absolutely ludicrous. They're just, really concerned ladies. So I think we're going to see that. And if you ask me what's going to happen, I think that inevitably, as Nikki said, there will be a case, maybe sooner or later, a little girl in our country will be abducted and raped and by an asylum seeker or someone who's been granted asylum, one of these guys we're talking about, and it will be absolutely inflammatory. Then there will be something that will make the country say no, when we cannot live with this.
Well, I mean, you say that, but I can't help but think that we've sort of had various examples of this already happening, and we've listed a few of them. You mentioned Southport. Of course, Axel Rudolph was born here. His parents were immigrants. Actually, there was another case in a town just outside of Liverpool, and you mentioned the asylum hotels going to poorer areas, and this was a precursor to Southport. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the name of the town, but the police failed to deal with an asylum man in this hotel, and the video of him went viral, of him making a pass at a young girl. The police failed to deal with it, and so then the riots broke out. This was, I think, the beginning of 2023. But we've also have given examples of people being killed, and we can think of various terrorists, horrific terrorist incidents. So you say there's going to be one and it's going to change the mind of the nation, but it seems to me that we've had many, and it sort of hasn't. Or the people have had enough, that's for sure, but the Westminster class, the uniparty, they're still dragging their feet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it obviously is hard to cut through because the levels of denial are so great, aren't they? I just think we can look back and we see there's often an image, there'll be an image of a child or something. There's often one case that cuts through. I could be wrong. That's what I think. We should also add, by the way, that one of the many corner cutting things that's gone on. So at the moment, the system is under huge pressure because of this. We had the Rishi Sunak promise, which led to corner cutting. Now we've got the Keir Starmer promise. We're going to empty the asylum hotels. So what's going on in lots of cases now is that there aren't in-person interviews anymore. So they can just fill in a form online, which you can imagine leads to, again, all manner of just scams, really.
Wow. Yeah. So a classic progressive rejoinder would be that we need to have safe and legal routes for asylum claimants to the UK. I would say that famous examples are not technically legally asylum, but if you look at the Hong Konger program we had, which was a visa scheme, and then you also look at how generous we were to Ukrainians, again, not technically asylum, but I guess they were It was the spirit of granting asylum. And there are other examples, but and these are kind of good gestures that I think we've done. And I would note with, let's say, the Hong Kongers, they're kind of culturally half British.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be a Hong Konger is to be sort of half British.
We haven't, as far as I know, heard of any Hong Kong Chinese raping girls in a Bristol hotel, have we?
Right. And a lot of the what Hong Kongers we've been getting are indeed Christian, I think, maybe half of them, maybe more. And likewise with the Ukrainian, I think it's been mainly Ukrainian women and their children and grandmothers.
Yeah.
And hypothetically, they'll be going back to Ukraine after. So we have still actually in recent times been generous when it comes to asylum, and it's not backfired. It seems to be that when it comes to specific cultures, that's where the problem is. But hearing you speak, it seems to me that what you're suggesting at the moment is just no more. Like, we can't take it. So sort of zero. Asylum. That's your position.
I would look at claims from women. I mean, the irony is, isn't it, that we know I'm involved with charities that are trying to support Afghan girls at the moment who are just denied education. The system in the country for Afghan women is horrific. The irony that we're granting asylum to all these Afghani men, when I could certainly see I would let in some Iranian girls and Afghani girls, to be honest, Winston. I wouldn't. I think we've got to go to zero now. And I think that you could have processing in embassies around the world, British embassies, and if there were, someone who was in clear risk of, mortal harm or persecution, then you could look at those. But just these thousands and thousands of constant nonsense claims. Yeah. Okay,
so let's play a hypothetical. Alison, you're now in charge of Britain's asylum system and immigration system. You have you've seen how the current, the Human Rights Act and all these different acts are working and being used against the British. How would you reform it? How would you turn it around and make it robust and safe for our country?
Well, we have to leave the ECHR. We have to repeal the Human Rights Act here. Any of the legislation that the immigration lawyers can use to string out the cases for their clients. Anyone who enters our country illegally. I mean, if you and I tried to break into the United States, we know what would happen, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you go into the US with a valid passport, they can make it very unpleasant. So essentially anyone who's broken into our country is removed immediately to a detention centre, and then they'll be taken to an aeroplane, and then they will be deposited somewhere to be decided. I don't know. We must have got some islands in the South Atlantic. It's got to be drastic because it is an absolute crisis. And what I find so strange since speaking to Nikki is I just expect to see this every day on the news. Why isn't it on the news every day? Why are we not afraid of what's being done? Every single day, last Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 2,000 men crossed the Atlantic, young men of fighting age. What are we doing? Where are they going to go?
Yeah.
What's going to happen to the women in the communities where they're dumped? Anyway, but so yes, coming back to, we know Australia was a really good example. They had a huge problem of Vietnamese boat people. They brought in a zero tolerance policy. They wouldn't let them land. They took them for processing in Nauru, an island, I think. And the minute that was brought in, no more problem. They don't have any more people coming now, because if these guys are going to pay 3,000, 5,000, 7,000 for passage to a people smuggler, if they know that they're not going to ever be allowed to stay in the UK and they are going to be deported, you'll it's supply and demand, isn't it?
Yeah, quite.
It's going to stop.
Create disincentive.
But this shouldn't be This shouldn't be a right-wing attitude. This should be the attitude of anyone who wants our country to be safe for our children to grow up in.
I don't think it is a right-wing attitude.
Well,
I think if you look,
I'm
do you think it
sure
is?
there are people who would watch this and think what I'm saying is racist. It's not. There are cultures that are inimical to our traditions. We are a Western liberal democracy in which women and men enjoy equality. That is not true for much of the world, right? So what is the plan for integrating these young guys who come from countries where women are treated as livestock and aren't allowed to go outside without being covered from head to toe? There is no plan, is there? It's just, see how you go, love. That's it. That's the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, if, whatever, Charlotte gets raped, oh dear, another one, never mind, it's just a bit of, it's seen as if it's like some naturally occurring thing. It shouldn't be allowed, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be allowed. It's changing our country drastically. It's making, as I've said, it's making rural areas now where I was talking to the Pink Ladies in Epping, and a lot of them work in the City of London. They get a commuter train back to Epping, and people said the women they'd walk home in the evenings, summer evening, nice walk home. Now they're asking husbands or children to come and pick them up from the station because it's too scary to walk home. And now you might say, oh, that's a small change. Why should they have to change? What's going to happen, Winston? I can predict this. There will be or maybe, love, you don't want to walk that way. You can, walk another way, or, maybe you could wear something a bit more modest. Maybe you don't want to be wearing shorts. This is incrementally, the native population will be obliged to alter its behavior to accommodate the mores and values of incomers who we should never have let in.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that the media are not talking about this properly. This actually totally fits with the Michael Prescott memo about the BBC.
Yes,
so he's done this big expose, which is published in the Telegraph.
Yes.
And he goes through the many ways in which the BBC were demonstrably biased and demonstrably pushing some stories, ignoring others. And one of them was immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite curious then that you have this giant institution, 20,000 people, and even though the majority of the country now are in favor of or concerned about illegal immigration, concerned about immigration, concerned about all these things we've discussed, this behemoth isn't, and is actively working against, is actively working to hide some of these stories. Mm-hmm. What did you make of the memo and this expose?
Well, I think that the big headline that's come out of it, obviously, is the doctoring of the Donald Trump documentary, his speech. I thought that when you've had people like Samir Shah, the chairman of the BBC, is actually, I think, is a good guy.
Agreed.
But saying it was a sort of regrettable error. It's not an error. That's like a police officer planting evidence on a suspect isn't an error, right? What the Panorama lot were thinking was, well, it's the kind of thing Trump would say, because he's a bad man and we hate him and he's got it coming. So taking a line from the beginning of the speech and then taking a line from 54 minutes later and seamlessly soldering them together to look like he was inciting riot, that's not an error. It's not even just a grotesque breach of journalistic ethics. It's criminal. It could have altered the course of an election. So it's incredibly serious. But the BBC reaction has been obviously to focus on this, the big Trump thing. I mean, we'll find out, won't we, whether he's proceeding with his
to sue his $1 billion
lawsuit. He certainly will want a grovelling apology. He is quite right to be furious. Nigel Farage has said he's spoken to him and he was, this is our most important ally. It's an astonishing way to behave. But the BBC hasn't really particularly wanted to focus on the other aspects revealed by Michael Prescott, which is in the far leftist identitarian politics, which has infected most of the BBC. And we've actually had veteran journalists like Mark Urban, who was Newsnight defence editor for many years, talking about meetings where younger colleagues, the sort of po-faced Maoist young social justice warriors would be vetoing guests like J.K. Rowling or Rod Liddle on the grounds that they were bigots or, just couldn't be had on the programme. So I think the BBC is colonised by that mindset. And one of the things Michael Prescott mentioned, I think there was a day where it was the worst number of people coming across, the most number of people coming across the channel in the small boats. No coverage of that at all. So lots of what the BBC does isn't just, citing statistics from the Gaza Health Ministry as if they haven't been made up by Hamas, okay? But there are sins of commission and sins of omission. So you leave out, you don't mention that, or you don't invite Scottish nurses on or Darlington nurses who haven't wanted to get changed with men called Sue, which we know has happened. So it's it's an institution it's always been a liberal institution. I mean, I used to work years ago in the kind of 1990s for the BBC. It's always been liberal left. But where it is now is just crazy, really.
Yeah.
It's Corbynist left now. And I think, Winston, that at best BBC represents 20% of the country. That's at best.
Yeah.
And it takes money from the further 80% who it tries to lecture about its values and behaviour by indoctrination. And I think it's taxation without representation. Because millions of people in our country can watch the news and think, or watch a sitcom or whatever, and think this bears no resemblance to, but there's a finger wagging, Auntie knows best.
Yeah, quite. Matthew Said wrote in the Times a piece about institutional capture, and he describing how a group of progressive activists whose worldview represents about 13% of the country have dominated about 75% of these kinds of institutions, like the BBC. And I think it is the Corbynista types and the progressive types. But you use a term which I find very interesting because I think it ties all of this together. It's the far-centrism. Because for me, that is how it's almost like it's the far-centrists, and I'm going to ask you to unpack this for me, that are the ones actually in the positions of power. They might the ones at the top of this awkward pyramid. What is far-centrism?
Well, I believe it's a term that was coined by the great historian Jonathan Clark, who used it. And it really struck me, when someone mentions something, you think, yes, that's exactly right. So they fancy themselves virtuous. That's and we saw Tim Davie when he was resigning as Director General, and he talked about the BBC's enemies as if all of this is concocted by dreadful right-wing enemies. But he said, we represent the best of society. Now, I think that that's the view of the far-centrists, is they don't perceive themselves as extremist. They just think they are the good people who believe what any nice person would think, right? I don't think it's nice that BBC children's programmes basically advance a cause which means that young people will be mutilating themselves or taking life-altering hormones. That doesn't make them nice people, does it? But they will think that they're nice people. Be kind.
Yes.
Pro-trans. People like me, you're a TERF. No, I'm not. I don't think a 13-year-old girl should think she's in the wrong body and plan on having a mastectomy. That's not being kind. But they've colonised the sort of the virtuous ground. And I think that's probably it's in the Home Office, isn't it? We see it in the NHS. and in the BBC. So far-centrist really is a term which means people who think they're impartial and they hold normal views, but their views are actually very far. They're extreme, and they don't tally with the views of many of their fellow citizens whom they would disparage and think were bigots.
Yes. And far is an appropriate prefix there, because if you look at the results of the illegal immigration, and we haven't even mentioned, let's say, for example, the Pakistani rape gangs, like these are extreme things that are happening as a consequence of this worldview. I think you've nailed the nail on the head when you say they think they're partisan. They think they are impartial, but they think their views are normal. They are so unaware that they have an ideology that it's not occurred to them that they're wrong in their ideology. So it is essentially a sort of progressive liberal cult.
It's a cult.
And if you look at the response to the Prescott memo, none of them have actually tried to seriously, apart from the doctored one, where the best counter from them has been like, well, it might be doctored, but look what else Trump has said. It's not like it's out of character for him to say this, even though I think they completely manipulated what happened on January 6th before, in this Panorama doc, before that election, the 2024 election, as you say. But they're not even the rest of the memo. They didn't actually deal with any of them. They didn't actually deal with any of the accusations when it comes to environment, immigration, trans. The Gaza stuff is absolutely horrific. It's actually, for me, the most offensive thing. The BBC have acted as de facto propaganda arm for Hamas.
I think the BBC is institutionally anti-Semitic.
You do,
and I think the BBC must take some of the blame for the attack on the synagogue in Manchester. And I think that the rise in levels of hatred and abuse to our Jewish citizens, many of whom are now leaving the UK because it's not safe. And I did a sort of commemorative event for the October the 7th massacres just a few weeks ago. And I mentioned the BBC and Jeremy Bowen, and these very, very polite people, they jeered, right? And there was Jews and people who are friends of Jews. Absolutely just astonishing abuse of journalistic power, citing statistics. I mean, some of your viewers may remember there was a guy from the UN, a British guy, that was on the Today programme on Radio 4 saying 14,000 babies are going to starve to death in Gaza in 48 hours. Tom Fletcher,
yeah.
Correct. And I was listening to this and I thought, I'm a journalist, so I'm thinking, where are the 14,000 babies? Where have you got that? Where have you got that figure from? You know, it's absolutely astonishing. And then very quietly, a few weeks later, I think the UN retracted that statement, and Mr. Fletcher said he needed to learn to be a bit more precise with his words. He'd lied, not precise with words, lied. And the guy who attacked the synagogue, the Islamist guy who attacked the synagogue in Manchester, shouted, "Our children and our babies," right? So there could be a line, couldn't there, from the 14,000 babies talked about on the BBC, subsequently withdrawn, but that was all over the headlines. So I see the BBC coverage of Gaza, which Michael Prescott says downplayed any suffering, by Israel, misrepresented, seized upon any bad action by Israel. I wouldn't by any means say that the Israelis had behaved perfectly, but it's a worldview which we hear in the Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen, don't we? Which is the missile that's just landed on the hospital in Gaza, that's fired by the Israelis. No, it wasn't.
Didn't even hit the hospital. Hit the car park next door.
Hit the car park. And again, as a journalist, I remember hearing I don't know if it was 50. It was again, they give a suspiciously round number within minutes of how many people have died. So,
sorry, just on the Jeremy Bowen, it wasn't just that he made that mistake. It's that then in a follow-up interview, after it was revealed he was completely wrong about it, he was asked if he regretted it, and he said no.
mm-hmm.
So it's this remorseless. That is activism. It's that's no longer journalism.
No. Well, I think that's right. I think there's a lot of activism.
Just for the sake of accuracy, though, when you say you think the BBC is anti-Semitic, do you mean that through their coverage of the Israel-Hamas war, you believe that is evidence of their anti-Semitism specifically?
Yes,
okay.
I do.
Yeah.
And I think they won't call Hamas terrorists. I mean, you've got to hand it to Hamas. They've been doing a really good impersonation of terrorists, haven't they? I mean, I recently interviewed a released hostage, Eli Sharabi, remarkable man. And he spoke about his captors, and he spoke about Western naivety, about these guys. He says they don't just hate Jews, they hate freedom, they hate the West. They don't think that there should be countries like Belgium, France, UK. They think should all be their country. So yes, I do think there's been grotesque anti-Semitism from BBC reports, and Michael Prescott in his review points also to BBC Arabic, which has just been interviewing Hamas, shamelessly interviewing Hamas supporting people. I think it's been grotesque. I found it grotesque.
Yeah, I was actually in Gaza last week, and when you're there, you see everything in military terms, and the sort of total failure of the BBC to try and understand or present the war as a war in terms of military operations shows to me that they're not serious journalists, because that's the only thing that matters when you're in a war zone is
well, also complexities like we've seen since Israel's withdrawn. We've seen Hamas executing people in the street, haven't we?
Absolutely. Guys, there's been much coverage of that? Not much.
Not much coverage. So you'd think that this war had been the horrible IDF against these poor suffering Gazans. There's been almost no mention of these. They're a mafia, aren't they, Hamas? They are a cruel mafia.
Yeah, that's putting it kindly.
Yes. So when Israel refused to go along with Hamas taking the aid that was going in, because that's where they're getting a lot of their money. And in fact, Eli Sharabi, who was held hostage in the tunnels, said that the Hamas would be coming down with all the UN aid boxes and feasting like kings, while he and the other Jews were given half a pitta a day, and Eli ended up weighing less than his youngest daughter, who was also killed on October the 7th, along with her mother and her sister. So the brutality and ideological evil. You know, I think actually I've been thinking about this. How's this for a theory? As we become more secular in the West, so as we've lost faith in God, have we also lost faith in the devil? Because I think Hamas are evil. I think they're devils. And I think that the Western mind has become so polite and so complacent that not only does it not believe in God, which it probably thinks is a bit cheesy and a bit traditional, but it doesn't believe in evil. And there is evil.
Yes, I think you're onto something there. I'd say that combined with this sort of progressive fallacy that all humans just want to get along, they want to have families and live prosperous lives. Actually, I don't think that's the case. I met with some Hezbollah militants in southern Lebanon earlier this year, and that's not what they want.
You've been having some nice holidays, haven't you?
Quite. That's not what they want. They want to kill Jews. They explicitly told me they want to kill Jews. They want to destroy Israel. These don't want all people don't want the same thing. You describe these people coming over to Britain. Like you say, they want to have sex with young girls. They don't want to start families. That's not what they're doing. In fact, it's even demonstrably true or demonstrably false. Within Britain, not all of us want those things. So let alone these people who are even further estranged. But I think you're absolutely right about the that idea. One last point on the BBC, if I may. You say that they won't call Hamas terrorists, and there's a famous interview of Samir Shah, the chairman, who I do know Samir. I think he's a very nice man.
Yes, I think he's...
And it was with him and Rod Liddle on the Times Radio, and he said he wouldn't. Speaking as the chairman, not speaking as Samir Shah, speaking as the chairman, the BBC have taken the view that they wouldn't use the term terrorist without appellation. I'm not totally exactly sure if he articulated himself there, but it is the position of the BBC won't call them terrorists. What's curious to me, though, is in the Second War, we had no problem. The BBC had no problem understanding the Nazis as the enemy. It didn't need to be neutral when it came to our obvious enemies at that point. And it also seems when you talk about, for example, BBC Arabic, and it's not British people who are working at BBC Arabic. The people employed from other parts of the world. If it has to be impartial, shouldn't it at least be why does it have to be impartial when it comes to enemies like that? And shouldn't they be British? Shouldn't we have if the British government assign terrorist the appellation to Hamas, why can't the BBC do it? At what point does it have to be so neutral that it is running apologia for enemies of the West?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You see, I think there is now, in the sort of liberal progressive mindset, I think there's suspicion of anything like our country, our national interest. You know, these guys pose a threat to us. Our women and children should be protected. I think that's just seen as being racist, bigoted. Mm-hmm. Our values, I'm sure they'd think that was, not even sure what they'd call it, probably racist. So I think it comes back to that. But you're right, Hamas is designated a terrorist group by the British government. If the BBC is the national broadcaster with a tax to support it, then you'd think it would be falling into line, wouldn't you? With the official designation.
Yeah.
But we've been very slow in our country. You know that I'm sure I've spoken to people in the Middle East who they can't believe that we haven't prescribed certain extreme Islamist groups here.
Muslim Brotherhood for a start.
Muslim Brotherhood have been very, very slow. Clearly Iran has been, a few weeks ago, I know from a contact in the SAS, there was a load of Iranians, terrorists had come across on the small boats. I think they were living in a house up north, and the SAS went in and, got them out. That there are extremely dangerous people. The last time the Home Office said how many people, how many jihadists were on the MI5 terror watch list, it was over 40,000. So as with Nikki's story, as with these things, I think that there are things being hidden from us, and we are discouraged from, as the BBC will celebrate, it's another example, but one of the things Michael Prescott says is they'll say, oh, look at this wonderful cyclist winning this women's race, man, as Justin Webb said on Today programme, man, lots of celebrating of trans athletes winning women's prizes, right? Again, it's what we're talking about. It's promulgating a worldview that I would say was hostile, was in direct opposition to what most normal British people would feel.
Yeah.
They think, what's that bloke doing, towering over those nice girls? That's what they'd think. But you're not allowed to think that, because the nice person on the BBC News is saying, look at Andrea, she's won this swimming competition. Oh, look, she's 6'6",
yes.
With levers that are longer arms than the female competitor next, standing next to her. Yeah. So it's a worldview which masquerades as the only way that nice, decent people can think. And it makes an enemy of people in our own country.
Yeah. Far-centrism.
Far-centrism.
Alison, I'd like to finish our conversation with your story of arrest for...
not arrest.
Sorry, not arrest. You were visited by the police 1 year ago for a social media post from 2 years ago.
Yes, correct.
And there's some developments, I believe in this story, but perhaps you can just tell me again. I haven't actually heard it from you what it was that happened.
Yeah, it was a year ago on Remembrance Sunday for American viewers. That's Memorial Day. And I was getting ready with my black clothes and my poppy to go to the parade in our town, which goes to the little war memorial. And there was a knock on the door, and it was two police officers who said that I had caused offence to someone on social media, and they were coming to warn me about this. And I said, okay, what was it that I tweeted? Twitter is the social media that I do. The officer said, oh, we're not allowed to tell you that, madam. And then I said, oh, okay, so who is my accuser? And he said, we're not allowed to tell you that either, but it's not the accuser, it's the victim. So immediately you got the snapshot of what you're dealing with, which is the accuser. We have a system, you'll be familiar with it, Winston, in our country, of innocent until proven guilty. But the non-crime hate incident overturns that to, because that's the victim. And
wow.
Yes, wow. It was, although it was awful, it was very, very upsetting. It's very useful because I think when a journalist has a bad thing happen to them that happens to other people, so there are 30 people a day in the UK who are arrested for speech.
For social media posts.
For social media posts, but for rude, unpleasant, uncouth speech, okay? Which we believe people should be allowed to, within, apart from directly inciting violence against a specific individual. So that happened to me. I was very lucky. I know Toby Young, Lord Young of the Free Speech Union, and I was able to text him, and he said, right, we'll swing into action, which they did. They provided me with a solicitor, and the Telegraph, my newspaper, was absolutely brilliant. They immediately started campaigning on my behalf against Essex police, revealing, of course, that the police are very, very bad at actual crimes that people would like to be solved. Burglaries, theft, violence against the person, all very, very bad at that, but increasingly good at hate crime. And a police officer came forward as my source, who's a wonderful guy. And he said they're obsessed with hate crime. And he says we're coming back to our far-centrists again, Winston, they want to impose utopian values on society. So the idea of most people have of police as enforcing law and order, that's now not really what's going on. They have... They police for things called protected characteristics. So that could be ethnicity, sexuality, trans, whatever. So they've got a hierarchy of people they will police for. And by the way, Jews are not a protected characteristic, even though the Jews did their best to be the most persecuted people of the 20th century, didn't they? But they don't make the cut. So,
oh, really? So they're not...
Israelis are seen as white supremacists.
Yeah, but sorry, now you're moving. That's not actually an official...
Jews are not seen. So my tweet, that was the offensive tweet, we think was...
We still don't know.
No. Well, they haven't admitted to it, no. So, I posted a tweet. I thought it was police in London with, a bunch of Islamists, arms around them, celebrating something. And I was quite incensed by that.
This was shortly after October 7th, right?
Shortly after October the 7th.
Most of this, even before Israel had responded, there was celebrations in the street.
It looked like the police snuggling up to, and I said, why are the police cuddling up to the Jew haters, right? Now, it turned out that it wasn't the Met. Someone told me quite quickly on Twitter, it's not the Metropolitan Police. I think it was Greater Manchester Police. So I took it down because obviously I was factually inaccurate. Of no way would I resile from the sentiment, which actually was quite prophetic, I think, saying that the two-tier policing, that was before we really knew how the hate marches would go and so on. It was quite interesting that so the police visited me apparently over that tweet calling out Jew hatred, but a Jewish woman got in touch with me and said she had drawn Essex Police's attention to a tweet by someone who's quite famously anti-Semitic, and it basically said, why not attack Jewish schools, right? So that was more inciting than mine. And the lady got the reply from Essex Police, yeah, we're sorry you were upset, but it was written in the heat of the moment, so no harm done.
Yeah.
So attacks.
Immediately think of Lucy Connolly getting 31 months.
Certain people's incitement, mine, you get a visit from the police. But so very definitely two-tier justice. But I have had a year to find out more about these thought crimes. And I know the word Orwellian, Winston, is overused, but it is Orwellian. The more you protest you didn't intend hatred, the worse it gets for you. It's absolutely extraordinary. And I think what people don't understand is my accuser, victim, can he or she, they don't have to know me. You could be in a pub having a chat with a friend, and someone walking past you could hear you saying something they didn't like, and they could report you for that private conversation, which I find astonishing, really chilling. And we've had examples of a 9-year-old boy in a playground shouting, smelly, fishy, retard, getting a non-crime hate incident.
Yes, correct.
Really, absolutely mind-blowingly. Again, they seem farcical, but they're not funny, are they? Because they're an attempt, again, as we see with the asylum system, as we see with the BBC, an attempt to control people's thinking, to only allow certain kinds of speech and thought that are deemed to be acceptable.
Yeah. There's been 250,000 non-crime hate incidents bookings since 2019, I believe.
Yeah.
Might have been a bit early. Maybe it was 2014. But
I think it's 2014.
2014.
Yes.
So everything from a school child saying another school child smelled like fish to another school child got booked for scuffing a Quran in the school corridor. It's absolute insanity. But I wanted to just understand, because having followed your story a little bit, although never hearing it from you, what I'd understood is that you'd posted a flag from Pakistan. It was people in Manchester holding a flag from Pakistan. And I think it had been a political flag from Pakistan that you'd misidentified as being some sort of Islamist flag. Is that incorrect? Or are you saying that you still don't fully know what the offending tweet was?
I don't fully know, but I believe that picture, that the men in the picture were members of a group who don't think Israel should exist.
Right.
So I wasn't particularly far out by calling them Jew haters, I don't think.
Okay.
But I guess the point is somebody, literally it could be someone who, with a grievance or a grudge, and the police don't have to question my accuser. That seems to me astonishing.
Yeah.
Not say, have you got any motive for, do you not like centre-right blondes who write for the Telegraph? I mean, it's to me, it's astonishing that their motive, they just have to say they experienced hate. And I heard from lots of police officers actually who they despise this stuff, some of them. And this lady had been a senior police officer, and she said she decided to leave. She said a woman rang up, a black lady rang up and said she wanted to report this woman because she'd taken the last bunch of daffodils in the supermarket. And the police officer said, "Yes, what was wrong with that, madam?" And it was a white woman who'd taken the daffodils. And then she said, "But I wanted them." And actually, it's quite interesting. Another police source said, "Look," he said, "in my day, your case would have come in. He said, I've told my sergeant, bin it, right? But he said that was when we were allowed discretion. And now anything which has got the word race or racist in it has to be taken terribly seriously, even if it's, but I wanted those daffodils. So you see how our... And I would argue that while it's, of course, racial hatred is horrible, I would argue that what all this encouraging people to experience hatred or to come up with evidence of racism doesn't make for a happier society, because you are encouraging children or adults to see themselves as victims rather than as robbing along, as we all must, in a society. And I would say that wokery has provoked more racism than eased it.
Yes, that's exactly right, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you see yourself as a victim, then you'll have the consequences of a victim. It's actually a paradox, because you might actually there might be incidences even when you are a victim, but if you see yourself as a victim, it'll make your situation worse.
I fought back, and the Telegraph fought back for me, and the police double down, as the BBC doubles down when mistakes are pointed out. They just can't say, look, that was a really bad call. If Essex Police had said, obviously turning up to the lady's house on Remembrance Sunday, I mean, I was incensed, Winston, because obviously I was upset. I said to these young coppers, I said, do you know what it is we're commemorating today? I said, hundreds of thousands of young British men, the age you are now, fought and died so we wouldn't live under tyranny. What do you think they'd think of you visiting a journalist on Remembrance Sunday? I mean, it was almost beyond parody, really. And I suppose it's made me see the fight for freedom and free speech as being very urgent. And I think I think there are lots of reasons in Britain to worry about it.
Yeah. And are you going to take further action?
Yes, well, I've got a legal action against Essex Police and against the Police and Crime Commissioner, who is supposedly a Conservative, but like lots of Conservatives, hasn't acted in a very conservative way. And he appeared on LBC radio station in the week when I was still under live investigation, and he said her crimes. It's me. Her crimes can carry a prison sentence of up to 7 years. He literally said that.
What? That's not even...
He said that. And
how could he even think that?
He didn't. He missed out the key word, her alleged crimes. Which, as any rookie journalist would tell you always have to put alleged, don't you? So, but that to me summed up the sort of cheery intimidation. And we're laughing, and it is funny. It's ridiculous. Well, it was awful at the time.
You have to laugh, but it's not funny.
You have to laugh. It's not funny. But imagine you're a person, you're one of the 30 a day who has people at the door putting you in handcuffs because you've said something bad about the PTA in some WhatsApp group. It's intimidating. And what the police officer I mentioned to you earlier said, the one who said, oh, I would have got my sergeant to bin it, your case. He said, what you have to understand, Alison, is they want you to be afraid to speak.
The copper said that?
Yes. What you have to understand is they want you to be afraid to speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
How chilling.
Pretty chilling, isn't it? Anyway, we're talking.
Well, we are, but it's, you have a platform, you have a microphone, you have your pen, and you're in a position to speak out, and good on you for fighting it. But the point is that those people across the nation, they'll hear your story, and they think twice before they speak. They think twice before they give their opinion on issues that we've been discussing in this conversation, because there are consequences, not just the police. So there might be more social consequences, there might be professional consequences. And so your case, even if you win, even if you...
I think that's true to some extent, but what I was very encouraged by with my case, as with the recent absolutely horrendous, notorious case of Graham Linehan, the beloved Irish writer and creator of Father Ted.
Very good man.
Very good man, coming off a plane, being handcuffed by 5 armed police officers. And I think actually some of this grotesque state overreach does backfire. There's a lot of people after my case. I mean, obviously people came up. You know, I was in London and taxi drivers said, you know, don't pay anything. You know, a lot of people thought it was outrageous and ridiculous. So I think it prompted, I think it although it may have got some people to shut up, I think also I think as with the Graham's case, I think a lot of people thought, that's absolutely not allowed to happen.
Right.
And I think
line in the
that
sand type.
People started to use, you got one of those non-crime hate things. And once the British start laughing, that's always a good sign. So people now will say, one of those, and it's passed into the language as something ridiculous. And one thing I would say, which is encouraging, is a couple of weeks ago, Sir Mark Rowley, who's the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, said that the Met would no longer be investigating non-crime hate incidents. That doesn't mean they're not going to be recording them. But nevertheless, Winston, I think this past year, since the coppers came to my door, has just, the mood has changed. I think police realise now that these cases are an embarrassment to them, quite frankly, and people are not having it.
I'm going to ask a difficult question here, which is one that I always get when I'm in America. They're looking over the Atlantic in horror at what's happened to the country. They have a great, good feeling for our country, with the motherland for them.
Yes.
And I mean, Britain sort of invented liberty. I know that Americans might have taken it to its zenith, but it did start here.
Yeah.
And they're going, what happened exactly? Now, I've got a theory about it, but I wondered if you might have an answer. How have we got to land of invention of liberty?
Yeah, Magna Carta.
Magna Carta, John Milton, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, to journalists getting a knock on the door for a year-long deleted social media post.
So I think it's to do with multiculturalism. I think it's to do with the fact that the project of multiculturalism, which, as we talked about earlier, that integration and so on had worked well for decades, and our country benefited. Certainly benefited from the country I was growing up in the sort of 1970s, when there was quite open racism, I think. But as that project has been unraveling, and as there's now huge tension, I think the clamping down on speech is because the state or the authorities, whatever you call them, know that people are onto them now. I think they know not just the riots, which are the most blatant display of that, but I think that they are aware that the public mood has shifted towards multiculturalism, and people are
against
multiculturalism, and that a lot of the censorship and the clamping down on freedom of speech, so-called hate speech, what it actually means is people, Britons, expressing views that we're not supposed to have, because we think, like me drawing attention, or like Nikki coming forward to draw attention to the threat to little girls, they don't want you to say that, because that calls their pet project into question. Do you think that
largely fits with mine? It's you look at post-war immigration, which starts slowly in 1947 and then more gradually through the 50s. You actually have the start of the Pakistani rape gang starts in the 50s. There's newspaper clippings about this. But then you get to 1965, the Race Relations Act. And this is the first time where, because multiculturalism isn't working, the attitude, instead of dealing with the root of the problem, which is maybe having conversations about integration, assimilation, maybe less immigration, being thoughtful about where immigrants can come from, how to place them in society. Singapore, for example, very tough on where people can live to encourage integration and assimilation. But you have 1965 Race Relations Act. That's following from race riots and precedes more race riots, and then just from then you have more and more of these acts accreting to try and at the state level deal with the failure of multiculturalism, so much so that it gets turbocharged again under New Labour, and you end up with non-crime hate incidents. And that's it's the end of this ridiculous state attempt to deal with a problem at its surface rather than its underlying issues. That's and I think that fits with your theory.
Yes, you've put it very well. Yeah, and I think we saw that, didn't we, with the various reports into the mainly Pakistani origin rape gangs, was that silencing those who said, I think this terrible thing's going on. So actually then people living in, as Louise Casey's report and various other reports found, was that people were scared. And, people thought it would look Islamophobic or whatever, or racist. So rather than be seen as that, they let the torture and rape of children go on.
Yeah.
Which I think history will judge us very harshly, that we lived in a period where that was allowed to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. Allison Pearson, an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I've got 2 or 3 questions from our Substack viewers who are great fans of yours. So I'm going to invite you onto Substack for those questions. But before we go over there, if you don't mind, is there anything you'd like to bring viewers and listeners' attention to, and of your work, perhaps your social media, any things that if they're listening in horror to some of the things you've presented, anything they might be able to do?
Oh, you've put me on the spot there, Winston. No, I'm not. I actually when I'm not on my high horse, I actually write comic novels. So
really?
So that's another side to me. Yes, I wrote a long time ago. I wrote a book about a working mother called I Don't Know How She Does It, that was made into a film with Sarah Jessica Parker. So go and look at the at the novel and find and they're just about making they're starting to make a musical of my second novel, which is called I Think I Love You, and it's about girls growing up in South Wales who are in love with the pop star David Cassidy. This is a bit before your time, but that's going to be a musical. So
wow, that's so exciting!
So we can take an evening off from worrying about the ruination of our nation, and go and sing along to some T-Rex or something.
That's awesome. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you. I don't know what's going to happen, really, because I don't think Keir Starmer will be able to stay on after that. There is a real problem with trust, I think, after 14 years of Conservative government. I think the next year or so is going to be incredibly interesting, and we'll see whether the Conservatives can start ticking back up.
Alison, how do you stop your fellow journalists who have been infected with mad cow's disease when it comes to Israel from making you vomit?
Very good. I think Jews in our country have made an astonishing contribution to this country. It's a great tragedy that if these astonishingly well-integrated, loyal, patriotic, hard-working people decide that it's no longer safe to live in Britain, and I think that's a tragedy.
They are leaving in droves, by the way. Thanks for watching The Winston Marshall Show with the phenomenal Allison Pearson. Head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, which is our Substack, to hear Allison answer some of our Substackers' great questions. That's all at winstonmarshall.co.uk. Otherwise, remember to subscribe, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Be well.